I think we already had something about core values, and we had a lot about interpretations, understanding of Islam. We have another presentation right now, um, and it's titled, Can Mystical Consciousness Yield Positive Insight? Lonergan and Saeed Nursi on Epistemology and Religious Knowledge. And we have from Regis College, the University of Toronto, Albert Frolov. Frolov,
Yeah.
welcome.
Thank you so much. Thanks so much for inviting me to this conference. And it's a conference about Christianity, but you have allowed Muslim voices also to rise, to come, to say something. I'm really grateful for that opportunity. Okay, so let's start. Anti-intellectualism of our postmodern time claims that facts and evidence no longer matter, that there are no self-evident truths, that every claim about the world is open to revision in light of new experiences. Universal standards of reasoning that once transcended cultures and eras are dismissed. Everything is reduced to subjective interests, personal perspectives, and the language through which we structure them. We're thus entrapped in endless language games with no reality beyond our linguistic conceptualizations. According to this view, diverse conceptual schemes may help us maneuver through life, but this is all they provide. The so-called facts are endlessly tweaked and twists, leaving us with structures...
You are describing the core tenets of postmodern philosophy.
Describing structures, the so-called facts endlessly tweaked and twist, leaving us with structures that remain forever beneath what metaphysicians once called knowledge of the real. Such anti-intellectualism cannot meaningfully address the notion of objective truth. For truth is treated as nothing more than a local product of our conceptual schemes and driven mostly by self-interest that is rarely, if at all, enlightened. It is we, not reality itself, who decides what is real. If postmodern anti-intellectualism already renders ordinary matters unintelligible almost, how much more so all things mystical, long considered obscure even under modernist terms? As Don Cupid observed, the very idea of religious mystical experience as a transcultural phenomenon died about 1978, drowned in the rising tide of postmodern culturalism. All of this makes a comparative study of religious mystical experience in Bernard Lonergan, whom you know perfectly well, and Badiüzzaman Said Nursi died in 1960, the Muslim theologian and spiritual leader, especially rewarding. Along with Jürgen Habermas, Lonergan is one of the few voices in our postmodern wilderness, I would say, who powerfully expose the self-defeating nature of denying objectivity. Nursi, for his part, develops a philosophical exegesis of the Quran that reveals the possibility of knowing the real as a radiant, sacred dimension of the physical universe, we so casually call ordinary. That is, the two thinkers genetically complement each other, while Nursi shows the path to the real mostly vis-a-vis the natural world, that is precisely the locus in which the modern naturalistic objectivism lost it. Lonergan shows the path to the real vis-a-vis one's intentional interiority, that is precisely the locus in which the postmodern rampant subjectivism lost it. Methodology-wise, this paper starts with a brief description, then we proceed to juxtaposition, and then we try to integrate their understanding in a tentative way. So let's proceed to Nursi. Also, Nursi never identified as a Sufi sheikh. He consistently engaged the same spiritual goal that was sought by all Sufis, the realization of the truth of truth, haqiqatul haqa'iq. For him, like for many other Sufis, the essence of mystical attainment lies in mushahada, which is the direct witnessing of divine truth. Yet his method diverges. Whereas classical orders often emphasized affective devotion, esoteric hierarchies, and prolonged discipline, Nursi grounds his pathway in one's rational reflection as formed and informed by the Quran only. Nursi criticizes traditional orders' methods as too slow, convoluted, or even self-aggrandizing in our age of egotism, and offers his Quranic exegesis, Risale-e-Nur, Epistles of Light, as a textualized spiritual guide distilled from the Quran itself. So he didn't need any other books to write what he wrote. He only used Quran. He was in prison for a very long time, and he just had Quran. Western scholars of mysticism often define the mystical state as a direct transempirical encounter with the transcendent, accompanied by the sense of oneness and noetic insight. So three things: noetic insight, the sense of oneness, and encounter with the transcendent. Nursi's mushahada readily falls into this category. It is a cataphatic form of mystical experience, one that unfolds precisely through the inflow on sensible data. Nursi calls Risalei Nur a trans-empirical exegesis, tafsiru shuhudi, insisting that he wrote nothing save that he has witnessed. For him, mystical experience is neither irrational nor purely ecstatic, but a cultivated perception of divine presence in creation. His approach represents both a continuation of classical Sufi insight and an adaptation of it into a rationally articulated, textually grounded system suitable for modern believers. Nursi's path to the real, haqiqa, is structured around four key concepts. First of all, impotence, which is ajz, toward God, poverty, faqr, toward God, compassion toward creatures, and reflective thought, tafakkur. So unless you don't feel poverty and impotence toward God, you cannot actually unlock this, mystical treasure of witnessing. You have to be impotent, very much close to Schleiermacher's understanding of total dependence on God. The first three, impotence, poverty, compassion, constitute one's inner vertical journey, in which the believer recognizes absolute dependence on God and becomes open to divine mercy. Nursi insists that these interior dispositions must be further cultivated through tafakkur, one's reflective contemplation of God's signs in nature, interiority, history, and scripture. This contemplation constitutes one's horizontal journey, seyri afaqi, a disciplined intellectual engagement with the created order. Taken together, these two approaches establish that Nursi calls the ma'budi or maqsudi perspective, the recognition that there is no object of worship or goal apart from God. So if God is the goal, then something that leads to God must be real. So unlike ecstatic mystics of wahdatul wujud, oneness of being, like Rumi or Ibn Arabi, who tended to plunge the world into non-existence, and among whom some proclaimed, I'm the only real, Nursi insists on sobriety. Human beings must acknowledge the tangible reality of the created world, their finitude before God's infinitude, and their ensuing unlimited need for His mercy. Once practicing the Nursian tafakkur, ajz, faqr, and shafaka results in mushahada, which is direct on trans-empirical witnessing. What is trans-empirical witness are the divine names and attributes, al-asma'ul husna, manifest in the tangible instances of creation. In this view, the universe and the soul both become a cosmic Quran, each being a sign pointing beyond itself to the divine. Science and knowledge for Nursi are rooted in these names. Natural science derives from the name Al-Hakim, that is all-wise. Medicine from the name Ash-Shafi, the healer. Geometry from that of Al-Musawwir, the determiner of forms, and so on. This integration of knowledge and faith illustrates Nursi's conviction that scientific inquiry, properly interpreted, unveils divine wisdom rather than undermining it. And there are parallels with Psalms a lot. If you read Psalms, you feel basically the same atmosphere of divine creation and beauty of creation that calls you into contemplation. Nursi's science-friendly approach, however, is not altogether alien to the perspectivalism of postmodern constructivism. He makes a clear distinction between the other indicative perspective, ma'na al-harfi, and self-referential perspective, ma'na ismi, on the universe, and affirms that one's all understanding of reality and one's all authenticity depends on one's personal choice of the either one. Purified of egocentrism, one's I-ness, ana, chooses the former and functions as the transparent medium through which God's attributes are recognized. Corrupted, one's I-ness arrogates the attributes of God to itself, becoming pharaonic. Thus, Nursi's anthropology underscores the epistemological, moral, and religious stakes of interpretation. The self and all that it perceives may become either a sign of transcendence or an idol of its own construction. We don't have time to explore it fully here, but let me just note, on the basis of the trans-empirically witnessed divine names and attributes, as they unfold on a cosmic scale rather than within one's inner world alone, Nursi offers various philosophical proofs of all 6 pillars of Islamic faith, those shared with Christianity. For example, if God is truly wise, then the absurdities and injustices of this world must be redressed in another. Hence, there must be hereafter. If such a world exists, then in His wisdom, God will not leave humanity uninformed. He will communicate through angels, prophets, and revealed books. And if He is wise, events cannot be arbitrary. They must already be inscribed in divine knowledge, which is what predestination basically means. Yet ambiguities remain. Nursi strongly values reflective thought, tafakkur, but he also stresses ilham, inspiration, as intensified intuition, hats. The relationship between disciplined reflection and sudden inspiration is left unclear, and I basically bring Lonergan to make it more or less clear. Let's go to Lonergan. His approach begins not with revelation, but with an analysis of human cognition. At the core of human consciousness lies what Aristotle called wonder, an unrestricted desire to know. This desire unfolds across 4 levels of intentionality. First, we experience the data of the world and of our own consciousness. There arise 3 guiding questions. What is it? On the level of understanding, is it really so on the level of judgment? And is it worthwhile on the existential level of decision? In Lonergan's account, knowledge is never mere intuition, but a critical grasp of reality. Reality grounded in the sufficiency of evidence as grasped by the subject and potentially demonstrated to the others, because it's evidence, or what he calls the virtually unconditioned. And it's never like taking a look. It's understanding, not just seeing truth. It's understanding something is true and understanding that this understanding is correct. So several operations. What is it? Is it really so? You ask questions. You do something with your mind and within your subjectivity. One grasp of reality in turn points beyond the subject to an independent and hence objective reality. This reality itself, however, needs to be ultimately grounded in something that is itself unconditioned and unrestricted, something that we would call God. Because this notion of reality is all-comprehensive, it grounds and structures all possible metaphysics. Any attempt to deny the possibility of objectivity only confirms its existence, because one cannot deny anything without first experiencing something, trying to understand it, and then judging it. In Lonergan's view, it is this universal structure of human cognition that constitutes a unique epistemological foundation that transcends historical and cultural variations, providing a universal basis for philosophy and theology alike. Yet this process is vulnerable to distortion of biases. Dramatic bias arises from unacknowledged psychological wounds. There is also individual, group bias. There is general bias of common sense that dismisses theoretical knowledge because its lack of immediate utility. One's conscious recognition and acceptance of one's own cognitional structure, self-appropriation, along with the ever-present possibility of bias, signals the attainment of authentic subjectivity. Objectivity arises when subjectivity transcends its own limits from within, so to speak, and thus becomes authentic. That is, when a person abides by the transcendental precepts of human intentionality in a conscious and self-accountable way. Be attentive, be intelligent, be reasonable, be responsible. So religious mystical experience for Lonergan arises most clearly on the 4th level of intentionality, where the question of value is asked. Here the subject encounters a transcendent gift that surpasses discursive inquiry. God communicates his presence not as a conceptual answer, but as a supernatural communication of his love, which is explicated in Romans 5:5. This love is immediate, not mediated by concepts or judgments, like a smile that communicates feeling without words. God's love is a pure experience of transcendent value, drawing the subject into the cloud of unknowing. This state entails one's radical transformation. The subject becomes being in love with God in an unrestricted manner, whereas ordinary knowing operates through experiencing, understanding, judging, and this religious mystical consciousness elevates those levels into the higher context of cosmic love. While the initial gift of divine love is immediate, its later expression in thought and culture is always mediated by history, language, and imagination, the permanency of dogma, the permanent meaning of dogma. That's basically what Lonergan means, and Professor Dosky can correct me. Despite his brilliant critique of Kant's epistemology and insight, Lonergan's model of religious mystical experience seems to take Kantian objections seriously, and to my mind, perhaps too seriously. While religious mystical experience is undoubtedly real, any articulation of that experience unavoidably comes to be shaped by cultural linguistic constructs, according to Lonergan. The key here is that religious mystical experience is non-intentional. It does not objectify God. It doesn't have any object. But it unites the subject to God through love on rather a subconscious level. It has its content, love and value, but not an object in an ordinary sense. The loving subject comes to perceive reality through the eyes of love, reinterpreting all judgments and decisions within the horizon of transcendent value. Faith rather than verified knowledge becomes the cognitive correlate of this experience, since God's immediate presence is not available to critical inquiry. This presence remains as a preconceptual undertow of consciousness, a fateful call to a dreaded holiness, which transforms the subject existentially while eluding definitive conceptualizations. Let's go to similarities. Both thinkers dwell on the central role of the human consciousness and the sense of selfhood in attaining the real. Nursi calls Wijdan, primordial consciousness, as a window into the Aql reason from which the beam of Tawheed, God's oneness, is diffused. Both would agree that there is an unplumbed depth to our consciousness that is forever attracted, munjazib, to real attractor, says Nursi, or al-known, says Lonergan, manifesting itself now in the sense of unrestricted wonder about things around Lonergan, now in the sense of need and unrestricted longing with Nursi. Both Nursi and Lonergan would agree that the real is not attained through blind imitation, what the Islamic tradition called taqlid, or through mere belief, but through personal investigation or tahqiq. So there are Muslims who follow taqlid. They don't use their reasoning or hearts. And Muslims would follow tahqiq, which is the way of self-appropriation. Both Lonergan and Nursi are realists in the sense that they deliberately build their reflections strictly on the data of sense and consciousness, rather than bypassing them in favor of abstraction, skepticism, or mere cultural construction. Let's proceed to differences. For Lonergan, the experience of being in love with God is a non-cognitive union, a form of self-transcendence that is not primarily intellectual. It's not primarily intellectual. It's deeply affective. Nursi, by contrast, insists that love of God, muhabbatullah, must be grounded in cognition, specifically in discerning divine manifestations within the particulars of creation. For him, love of God follows upon knowledge of God. Love of God follows upon knowledge of God. Aquinas' approach, but this is approach of Nursi as well. Lonergan tried to change that. Unlike many classical Sufis who foreground affectivity, Nursi directs modern Muslims to anchor mystical meaning in verified faith, iman tahqiqi, and in its rational affirmation, tasdiq, rather than in imaginational representations, tasawwur, or folk mysticism, irfan, stories that go around the people. He does not deny the affective dimension. Rather, he says that both direct and reflective insights themselves carry a charge of divine affection, tawaddadu ilahi. So this is novelty of my work, hopefully, that reflection, philosophical itself becomes a mystical experience because it grants the same senses, the same feelings that mystical experience does, but on a lesser scale, on a minimal scale. Thus, for Nursi, both reflective and intuitive insights are not just a release to the tension of inquiry, but also a felt experience of God. A further difference concerns inspiration. Together with reflection, it forms a cornerstone of Nursi's transempirical epistemology. Unlike Lonergan, Nursi does not fully recognize its limits. For Lonergan, knowledge is secured not by one's accepting mystical insight, but one's proceeding from the question of understanding. What is it to the question of reflection? Is it really so? Even if inspirations may evoke powerful feelings of divine presence, they yield at best preliminary conjecture rather than fully validated knowledge. Ironically, however, when Lonergan speaks of faith as knowledge born of religious love, his language edges close to the same intuition he critiques in Insight. Tentative reconciliation. The differences between Nursi and Lonergan can, I believe, be reconciled under a higher viewpoint. Lonergan emphasizes the critical praxis of the human self, its agency in establishing intelligent and reasonable relations in order to determine what is real and what is objective. This emphasis provides his way out of postmodern epistemic solipsism. His theory of cognition, then, can serve as an infrastructure to Nursi's metaphysical intuitions, making them accessible to a postmodern audience, just as Insight once made the metaphysics of God accessible to Lonergan's own audience. Though in Insight, Lonergan distanced this metaphysics from any appeal to mystical experience. That was crucial. And this is something that Nursi undoes in his own way. Yet those elements of Nursi's account of transempirical witnessing in which he appeals to the gradual procedures of tafakkur, reflective contemplation, rather than to the instantaneous inrushes of ilham, inspiration, demonstrate, on Lonergan's terms, how religious experience can be something not only fascinating, not only something tremendous, but also something that is rational, a feat that Lonergan's phenomenology of religious experience does not adequately accomplish. While Lonergan's cognitional theory objectifies and grounds the real as experience in ordinary life, it proves less capable of accounting for those moments when the ordinary discloses a surplus of significance, when, to borrow Lonergan's language or phrase, a spade is no longer just a spade, but becomes laden with transcendental meaning. This reflective mysticism of Nursi's is cataphatic without turning God into an object. What is objectified are the effects of God, or his energies, within nature and consciousness. His approach resonates with Pope Francis' insight that the universe unfolds in God, who feels it completely, and that a mystical meaning can be found in a leaf, a mountain trail, or a dewdrop. This cataphatic mysticism also echoes the Ignatian principle of finding God in all things, consonant with the Christian pansacramental principle that all created realities may mediate the divine. Freed from intuitivism and objectivism, by being embedded in Lonergan's cognitional infrastructure, Nursi's religious mystical metaphysics no longer represents the heart alone, but inhabits an area that Nursi always wanted it to inhabit, an isthmus between reason and the heart. In other words, his transempirical witnessing, when reinterpreted through Lonergan's cognitional theory as an experience that attends on reflective thought, provides a robust framework for showing how mystical experience may allow the experiencer not only to taste the otherworldly in the heart, but also grasp something factual and rationally communicable about the experience. Just very last passage. An illustrative example comes from Nursi's 22nd word. There he shows how a single flower can reflect no fewer than 17 divine names in a way that is both experiential and rational. He begins with an imaginative debate. Physical entities, from a particle to the stars, rise up to refute the arguments of a representative of misguidance. It is only after this dialogue that Nursi describes his transempirical witnessing as an abductive proof, that is, inference to the best explanation, that is also somehow spiritually tasted. Lonergan's theory of cognition helps us see what is happening here. It shows for the critically minded postmodern reader that Nursi is not gazing at a preconceived metaphysical idea, but is practicing attentiveness, intelligence, and reasonableness. The noesis and transcendent feeling that arise are not naive, socially constructed, or solipsistic, but reflect the witnesser authentic subjectivity beyond relativism or short-sighted pragmatism, and pointing towards objectivity that can, in principle, be publicly demonstrated to others. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yes, beyond fascination and wonder, religion can also be rational. Okay, we have less than 10 minutes for our question and answer segment. So quickly, Father Tom,
Okay.
Simon, and Nduri.
Thank you so much. I feel great affinity for what you're doing there. It seems to me you're synthesizing both insight, study in human understanding, and method and theology, plus other. Okay.
Exactly.
At the end of method and theology, there's the specialty of communications. So Lonergan's project issues not simply in a contemplative appreciation of creation and God in creation, but in the communication of the gospel.
Right.
Okay. What is the corresponding sort of outcome for Said Nursi? Would it be something along the line of the Gulen movement?
Oh, absolutely. Nursi is the teacher of Muhammad Fethullah Gulen. He is the main influence upon him. So he himself, Fethullah Gulen, repeatedly emphasized that he's a modest student of Badiüzzaman Said Nursi without meeting him in person. He never met him in person, but if you look at the historians of the movement, they will confirm. Basically, Hizmet movement is considered to be a Nurju movement, the followers of Said Nursi. Basically, this is their.
I don't know if everybody's familiar with the Gulen movement, the peacemaking Islamic. Okay.
Yes.
No, but
yes.
say more.
Well, I don't know too much more, except that it's controversial, and it was the president of Turkey was trying to.
Oh, okay.
Eliminated. Yes. I'm personal student of Fethullah Gulen. I spent 1 year in Pennsylvania taking lessons from him, and can personally affirm that he's not involved, and he was just sleeping in his bed during the night of the coup d'état, and he doesn't know how to turn on his computer and cell phone. We bring cell phone to him, and he asked us to open it for him. So he was in like 66, 80. He was about 80 years old when it happened. He barely can walk, and he has pump into his heart. So to accuse that very, very old man who can barely get to the stairs, it's just horrible, unfortunately.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think you stand at a crossroads that is very vital for our times, for the ability to have dual engagement dialogue. That said, Muhammad, peace be upon him, had the mystical experience. From there, the Quran is revealed to him. And yet, the tradition puts Sufism at the margins as though it is something to be feared. Christianity does the same thing to the mystical tradition. But we forget that even when we talk about the cataphatic, the cataphatic has no fullness, it does not even exhaust, there's no richness in it unless it pulls us into the apophatic tradition. That, and also the apophatic, so I was a bit uncomfortable when maybe I didn't hear you well, but there was a way you pushed against the apophatic, the intuitive.
Right.
The ability to love, to give the heart, it does not come from us. The God is the one who is love itself, who invites us through the apophatic tradition or the mystical tradition, and stirs in us the desire for God and teaches us how to love. And this is all within not in the cataphatic, it's still in the apophatic. But because we have to communicate that joy we have experienced, then you're talking about communication, language, then we have to figure out the social world. So in the past, in my work, I used to be very much, I wanted to ground everything in the cataphatic until I realized that that is not where it really begins. The apophatic, the mystical tradition cannot be thrown away. The post-Enlightenment tradition was a time of rejection of the mystical tradition. And look at where the world has gotten us to. So I think maybe I'm curious how your work is leading us back to that lost sphere, because we need it again.
Yeah, wonderful question, Professor Simon. Thank you so much. Well, the novelty of Nursi is that he brings this mystical experience from the Quran itself. So about for like 20, 30 years, he himself, first of all was in prison. He couldn't read any other books. But then he got accustomed to that, to read only the Quran. And then even when freed, he was always saying that I'm not reading any books at all. So he was claiming that he takes his experience from the Quran itself. And Quranic experience is cataphatic. It's cataphatic for a good reason, because apophatic mysticism is really hard to attain. It demands a lot. And Nursi's claim is that for people of modernity, it's almost impossible to really achieve that apophatic experience. Cataphatic is much more easier. It's everywhere. It's finding God in all things. And it comes close, very much close to Ignatian spirituality. And there are several moments, as I learned from books of Professor Dadowski. First moment, second, third moment of Ignatian elections, if I remember correctly. So the first moment of election, second and third. So the first moment is intuitive one. You just follow whatever your heart tells you to do. But the second and third are places for deliberation. You have to use your mind. You have to weigh things. Maybe it's a devil, the enemy, speaking, right? So you can't do it only by saying that, it's just gift of God and you have to follow. So you use your own mind there. So Nursi's mysticism is on the second and third moments, I would say. Or not totally, completely the same, but parallels. And he claimed that Quranic experience is much easier to achieve. The novelty here is that a lot of people didn't really name that experience as mystical. And I just studied mystical literature, and I realized that all mysticism researchers around the world, they all concur on the idea that whatever you have sense of contact with the transcendent, the sense of oneness, and the sense of profound knowledge, whatever you experience, it is mystical, basically. So that allowed me to put this category into mysticism, and I called it diffuse extrovertive mysticism. Hopefully, yeah.
Okay, we'll hear Nduri, your interjection quickly.
How does Nursi's idea of consciousness compare with the Mutazalite and Asharite tradition?
Oh, thank you so much. It's a huge question. It's an unresolved question. Mutazilites say that we have the freedom of will, and basically you know what is good and bad by your own understanding. You don't need God to understand that, and you don't need God to will anything. Almost, in very easy way to put it, we can say that. But Asharites realize that everything is dependent on God, and you almost don't have freedom of will, and you have to always follow the scripture. So he, of course, steers the middle way. He comes from Maturidiya tradition. So Maturidiya is the third pathway that was developed in the Ottoman Empire that tried to steer the middle way. So it says that basically through your akal, through your reason, you can understand what is good and bad, but you understand it vaguely. You need scripture to confirm what you understood vaguely. So yeah, kind of the good of both worlds.
Yeah. So we are right into the next paper, but before we go, Professor Dadowski knows how to just give the points quickly. So.
Oh, I was just going to say, you want to tell them about the conference you're organizing on the 14th?
Oh yeah, by any means. If you are at Toronto, yeah. We are organizing a conference in the name in the honor of my deceased master, Fethullah Gulen, in Toronto on October 14th. Starts at 9. Please, Toronto University, Emmanuel College. All of you are invited.
Do you want to tell them the topic?
The topic is the legacy of Fethullah Gulen. His educational ideas, his ideas on dialogue.
Can we follow it online?
Yes, we will make it available.
Okay.
Yeah. We can share the link.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, a lot of things going on in that presentation, and time is always a scarce commodity.